Hello and welcome to 10,000 Stitches podcast, a weekly, bi-weekly, sometimes weekly chit-chat all about the joys of small-scale knitting. My name is Andy and I like knitting. If you wanted to find me elsewhere on the interwebs, you can find me on Instagram, Twitter, and Ravelry as Probug, P-U-R-L-B-U-G. You can find my blog at theprobug.com, and we have the 10,000 Stitches podcast group on Ravelry. If you're looking for links to anything that I mentioned today, any shops or patterns or anything else relevant, if you're watching this on the blog or on the embedded video on the blog or on the Ravelry thread, everything will be linked right below the video. If you are watching this on YouTube, in the description box below the video, there will be a link to the blog post and you can follow that and then find all the links there. Today is Sunday, April 9th, I think, and this episode should go up on Tuesday, April 11th. Yes, I had my dates correct. Yeah, it feels like it's been a hot minute since I sat and talked to you guys, even though it's only been 2 weeks, but the past 2 weeks of my life have been that kind of 2 weeks where every day seems like it goes by so fast. You know, it's like all of a sudden it's time to go to bed and I'm like, what happened to the day? And even the week itself seems to go by fast where, you know, all of a sudden it's Thursday or something and I'm like, where did my week go? But then at the same time, it feels as though the past 2 weeks has just been forever long. And I'm sure you guys know what I'm talking about, sort of like where time both seems to pass really slowly and really quickly at the same time. But yeah, that's been my life lately. So today we'll be talking about finished objects, works in progress, what's coming up next, dyeing, knit along stuff, all kinds of the usual stuff. And I always mean to do this and I typically forget, but I thought I would go ahead and show the knit socks that I'm wearing today. So these are a pair of mismatched little short socks that I had, and I put them on before I went to the grocery store. I just put them on with my Birkenstocks. And yeah, went grocery shopping this morning. So, you know, I always enjoy wearing mismatched socks. And these are knit at two very different times. This one, the one with the croy, was made forever ago, and these were made far more recently. But, you know, they work. I don't notice the difference. So, yeah, that's what I'm wearing today. And yeah, let's get into the rest of the knitting. In terms of finished objects, I don't have any this week. Wah, wah. Yeah, things have been kind of busy and I've been a little bit, I guess maybe scatterbrained or unfocused with my knitting, so I don't have any finished objects. I do have some half objects, so let's go into the works in progress to do that. The one thing that I don't have to show you, which is a half object, and I'm kicking myself for not having it here to show you guys, is my waffle socks that I am working on at work right now. They're kind of like my leave at work project. And normally I would have brought them home with me to show you guys, but Friday got a little bit crazy at the end of the day and I never wound up making it back over to my office. And so, you know, Wesley was over there, and I asked him to bring my backpack with him, so, you know, when he met me to come home, but he did not grab my knitting, of course, which is totally reasonable. But anyway, I don't have those, but one of them is done. The other one is past the heel. And I think I've actually finished the gusset on it. So those should be done hopefully by the end of the week, and I'll have them to show you guys next time. But the other half object that I have is one that was on hold for a little while, and that is my traveling cable mitts. So this is a pattern by Pearl Soho. If you've been around for a little while, you'll remember that I made the Traveling Cables hat by Pearl Soho. And so these are sort of the mitts that use the same cable pattern. And again, if you've been around for a little while, you'll know that I heavily modified these to make them work with fingering weight yarn rather than, I think it's sport weight yarn is what the pattern calls for. And so I have all the mods, well, as carefully written as possible on my project page. So in the links below, I will make sure to link both the pattern page and the project page. So if you want to see the links or the modifications that I made, you can. But anyway, I have the right one completely done. This one was mostly done already. I just hadn't finished up the thumb yet. So now the thumb is done. So that's what that cable pattern looks like. So yeah, that's the cable pattern, which is on the back of the hand. Come on, you were focused. What happened, buddy? You were so focused. Anyway, and then the palm is just 2x2 ribbing. And so this yarn is hand-dyed yarn that I did over Christmas of this past year, and it's using black food coloring, and so it's very mottled. It's like super, it's got little bits of like white in it and some little bits of like blue where the black didn't quite take, and then the majority of it is sort of this like really dark reddish brown. This is what the ball looks like. So yeah, I really love this yarn, and I finished the first one. You know, all I had to do was the thumb ribbing, so I finished that one, and I've started the second one, and I'm through the sort of bottom, I'm all tangled up, I'm through sort of the bottom ribbing on it and into the cable pattern, and I think I am currently almost done with my second repeat, which means that I'm almost to the point where I'm going to start doing the thumb gusset increases. So yeah, it's so fast and so easy once I, you know, get into the groove of doing it. It's just picking them up that has sometimes been a little bit tough. And I think these are nearing that sort of stage where it's like, I just want to be done with them, and I'm just sort of a little bit bored with them. So I really should devote some time and just get this one finished up. But I'm not exactly sure who these are going to be for, because the intended recipient is no longer going to be the intended recipient. Or, well, the person I had in mind when I first started them is no longer going to be the person who's getting them. So I think these will just kind of get tucked away and be a gift for someone when I need an impromptu gift. The nice thing is that because it's all ribbing on the palm, they're like super stretchy, and so they fit my hands, and my hands are pretty big for a woman, but you know, they also fit like Wesley's hands, and his hands are smaller than mine, so you know, it makes it a good gift knit, because that way I can give them to pretty much anyone and they should fit. So yeah, that's a half object work in progress. My other work in progress that you guys have seen before is the flax light sweater. I think I showed you guys this last time, and at the time I had not yet started any of the sleeves. I was just done with the body. So I have started one of the sleeves, and this sweater has sort of been sitting in knitting purgatory. Like, I started this sleeve a while ago, and I obviously haven't finished it. So here's the saga about this sweater, right? So I am currently knitting the sleeve with these two 24-inch US 5s, and I don't like that because they're so heavy that they make sort of knitting with two circular needles a little bit tough, and I don't have any double points, and I need to just go get some double points in a size 5. But right, so I had these 24-inch size 5s. So Flax Light by Tin Can Knits uses a size 2 and a size 5. A size 2 is a US 2.75 millimeter, and a US 5 is a 3.75 millimeter. And so I had done most of this body on a 16-inch circular, and you know, I was trying to sort of do this baby size sweater to see how I liked it, and maybe think about making a grown-up size sweater for myself. And so I got really frustrated with the sleeve and kind of set it aside for a while, and I was like, okay, maybe the problem is just that I don't have the right length needles, you know? And so then I got thinking ahead to like, okay, if I want to make this sweater for myself, what size needles do I have? Because it's a pullover, and it's knit completely seamlessly. So, you know, for a grown-up size sweater, I'm pretty sure I would need, 16-inch needles in both a US 2 and a US 5. I would need 24 or 29-inch needles in a US 2 and a US 5. And then I would also need probably double points in each size as well. So, I have, the 24-inch circulars in a US 2 and US 5, and I have a 5 in a 16-inch. So it would mean that I would need to buy a couple more sets of needles. So then I started going and looking for needles and things like that, and I wound up buying a set of interchangeables, which I'm actually going to be returning because they're not really what I was looking for. But and then I just sort of realized that, like, I think my problem with this was not so much the needle conundrum, but just the sweater itself was not what I was looking for in terms of a sweater for myself. I hope to finish this one at some point. Maybe once I get some double points, I will hopefully finish this little baby size and put it aside as, a gift for someone. But my issues with this, and I think I realized this is my issue with the only other time I've attempted a sweater. Right, so this sweater is made using fingering weight yarn on a US 5, which gives you a pretty loose fabric. And the only other sweater I've attempted before has been the featherweight cardigan, which is, again, fingering or lace weight yarn on, I think, a US 7? which again gives you a very loose gauged fabric. And I'm realizing that I don't like that. You know, I would never wear a sweater like that. Like, I would never buy a sweater that's knit that loosely. So I don't know why I somehow think that I would want to wear one if I made one like that. You know, I don't enjoy knitting that loosely, and I don't enjoy wearing things that are knit that loosely. Plus, I don't enjoy pullovers, and so, like, you know, thinking about this flax light for myself, I just don't tend to wear pullovers. Like, I typically wear cardigans, and it's especially because I sometimes will wear sweaters in the middle of summer here, which sounds crazy because it gets so hot here in Virginia. But they air condition the buildings so aggressively that I will typically walk to work in like a t-shirt or something like this, and then get to work and have to put on a sweater because it's so cold in my office. So all of that thinking led me to a search for a new sweater to try out for myself, and that brings us to our last work in progress. So anyway, Flaxlight is hopefully going to get finished at some point, but I think I sort of decided that this was just not the sweater for me. And by the way, this yarn, the yarn for the body, is a hand-dyed yarn that I did again over Christmas. It's just sort of this very tonal lime green. And then the cuffs, like the bottom cuff and the neckline and the cuffs on the sleeves eventually, are the leftover yarn from my Speckled Space socks, which is again a yarn that I dyed up over Christmas, and it's just this sort of speckled light blue. Okay, so that's that. So our last work in progress is the sweater that I am knitting for myself, which I know, as someone who said I would never knit sweaters, I currently have 2 sweaters that are ongoing, but I don't know. I think, you know, it's not that I'm bored with socks or anything. I think I just needed like a new challenge, and a new challenge not in terms of technique, but in terms of like scope. I needed a big project, and I've really enjoyed kind of getting ready for this sweater and all of that. So the sweater that I am knitting is the Polly sweater. So it's a cardigan, and it's kind of annoying. I don't love this pattern picture because it doesn't really show you what the sweater is like at all, but it's a cardigan. It has sort of a garter detailing up at the top. It's a free pattern, so definitely go check it out. And it has a lot of projects, which is really cool too, because then you can look through all the projects on Ravelry and see what other people have done to modify it. But it has sort of this like garter detailing at the top, and then it's, you know, obviously like a V-neck sort of cardigan, and it has sort of a shawl collar, like a very shallow shawl collar on it, which I don't know that I love. I don't think I'm going to do that. And then it also has instructions for doing stripes, as is shown here. So that's what I'm currently making. And I actually just this morning got to the point where I divided off for the sleeves. Well, I actually divided off for the sleeves twice, because the first time okay, let's talk more about sweater pattern choosing. So I know that my body is a very strange size. I'm 5'10", so I'm very tall, and I have decently broad shoulders, especially like in terms of women's sizing. I have pretty broad shoulders, but I also have a very small rib cage. And so when I was trying to pick out my size for this pattern, you know, I took my bust measurement, wearing a bra and a shirt and everything, right? So that I would get an accurate measurement. And I got a 34-inch bust measurement. So I have a pretty small rib cage for someone who's as tall as I am. So I go to the pattern, I pick out my size, which turned out to be a small, right? The small in this pattern is for a 34-inch bust measurement. And normally I wouldn't do like a 0 sort of ease, but I gauge swatched. You guys, I've never gauge swatched, but I gauge swatched, you know, boom, gauge swatched, because I wanted to make sure that I didn't wind up picking a size that was totally wrong. And it turns out my stitch gauge was actually bigger than the pattern, which is a new one for me because typically I knit so tightly that I never have that problem. But my stitch gauge was a little bit high for the pattern. Was a little bit low, meaning that the set number of stitches was wider in my case than the pattern. I think that's the right terminology. But anyway, so I picked the size small, which was exactly my bust measurement, because I figured that since my stitch gauge was a little bit low. That way I would, automatically get something that had a little bit of ease to it. Because I wanted something that would be close fitting, but not tight, is kind of how I prefer to wear my cardigans. So, right, I picked out my size and I got all the way to separating off the sleeves and, casting on the underarm stitches, which is really the first point where you can kind of try it on and figure out if it fits properly. And so the first time, I did everything according to the pattern. I knit like 1 or 2 rows afterwards, just to kind of get a little bit of fabric there, and then I tried it on. And it was strangling my armpits. Like the underarm part was so tight that I was like, nope, can't do this. So then I ripped back those couple of rows and cast on like 3 times as many underarm stitches as what the pattern calls for. Because it only calls for like 12 stitches to be cast on under your arms, which winds up with a total stitch count for the upper part of the sleeve of like 70 stitches maybe. Which granted, so this is worked on fingering weight yarn, US 2.5 needle, which is a 3mm needle. So it's slightly bigger than socks, but even still, like I'm trying to think like, would a sock fit me, around my upper arm? And no, it wouldn't, because in addition to having decently wide shoulders, I don't have like pencil thin arms either. So I cast on a whole bunch more stitches under the arms, and even still it's a little bit tight. But I think what I realized the problem is that it has this like garter. Basically it's garter almost up until you divide off the sleeves. And so I think that means that the yoke part is not quite long enough vertically. And so then it became time to like, okay, do I rip it all back and start over and do all of the yoke in stockinette, which is what a lot of people have done in like the pattern pages or the project pages, or do I just keep going? And so what I've decided to do is just keep going. And, I always hear about how superwash yarn has a tendency to stretch vertically. So I'm kind of banking on that to stretch out this garter section part a little bit. And even if it doesn't, I can always sort of like give it a little tug when I go to dry it, and hopefully that'll help. But without further ado, this is what it actually looks like. So, like I said, it's knit with fingering weight yarn, a US size 2.5 needles, which are 3mm. And I don't even really know how to show this to you guys properly. So this is the top. This is the top. So as you can see, I have separated off the sleeves, and yeah, I'm now into the just endless stockinette for the body. This yarn up on top here is a yarn that I've dyed up myself, which I will talk about more when I talk about, yarn dyeing. But this is a yarn that I dyed myself this week. And it's not quite showing up super true to life. Who knows? Maybe I'll adjust the colors later on. But this is the ball of it. And so it's kind of a muted sort of blue-green sort of color. And then the contrasting color, which you can sort of see here, doesn't contrast as much as I would maybe prefer. But the contrasting color that I'm doing is this really pretty like mint green color that, again, I dyed up this week. And I am just so in love with this color. And, because it's a contrasting color, it only calls for 1 skein of this. And I can't imagine that I'm going to actually use very much of this, because it's basically, if we look at the picture again, it's basically only used for those stripes. And then it's also used, you can barely see it in the picture, but it's used to bind off sort of the like button band that goes around it. Although I'm not entirely sure that I'm going to do the bind off in that color. I might just do it in the main color, because I'm not sure that I love it being done in the contrasting color. But basically, I don't expect to use a ton of this. So I'm really hoping to use the rest of it in another project at some point, because I'm just so in love with this color. But yeah, so that's that. I feel like I haven't been super coherent talking about this pattern because I don't know a lot about knitting sweaters, right? Like, this is totally new to me. And so I've been sort of just feeling it out as I go along and hoping for the best. I definitely think that if I were to do this project again, I would probably do the yoke part in stockinette. But for now, I'm not going to bother ripping back, because even if it turns out to not fit me very well, I know someone who's just a little bit smaller than me, and I think it would fit her, and I would just give it to her. But the nice thing about this, right, so it's knit on these 3mm needles, and it produces just a much nicer sort of fabric. Like, it's a substantial fabric, but it's certainly not like as tight as like knitting socks, right? Like it's it's substantial, but it's not too substantial. And I think this is what I was looking for all along in terms of like what I want in a cardigan, right? In terms of a cardigan that I can wear all the time and I'm going to be really happy wearing, I think this is what I really was looking for. So, you know, even if it turns out that I don't like this garter section on top, I think this pattern is one that I really will like, just in terms of like stitch counts and all of that kind of stuff. And I think it will be one that I will come back to over and over again and probably modify for making other cardigans, assuming that this one comes out, you know, decently okay. But yeah, that's that. And I'm going to pause and I'll be right back and we'll talk about what's coming up next and then the dyeing that I've been doing. So in terms of what's coming up next, I mentioned this last time I recorded. I think the next pair of socks I want to do after I finish those blueberry waffle socks that are hanging out at work is the Flying North socks using that pink cherry blossom yarn that I dyed up a couple weeks ago. So that's kind of, those will hopefully be started by the time you guys see me again, because like I said, I'm pretty close to finishing those waffle socks. And in terms of kind of the stuff that I'm going to be working on at home, I'd really like to finish this cardigan maybe by the end of the month. I don't know if maybe that's a little bit too ambitious, but that's probably what I'm going to devote a lot of my energy to, in addition to like, you know, finishing up those scooter going by. In addition to finishing up those fingerless mitts and then the tiny sweater. So in terms of what's coming up next at home, I'm not entirely sure. I still would really like to do that shawl that I mentioned last time I recorded by Mina of the Knitting Expat podcast. I think it was the spring into summer shawl. And that's the one that kind of you can do with like mini skein sets. And I'm actually really hoping that I would have enough of this yarn left from my cardigan to use as the other color, right? Because that shawl is sort of, I think it's kind of done where you have like a 5-color set, you know, like to use like a 5-color mini skein set, which I have, and I showed you guys last time the shades of gray one. And then plus like one other color that sort of makes up a main part of it. So I don't know what exactly the yardage requirements are for that other color, but I'm hoping I will have enough of this because I think this, you know, very pale minty green would go super well with sort of that like gray gradient set. So yeah, that's what's coming up next eventually. And then in terms of dyeing, so I have actually done a lot of dyeing, well, since I talked to you guys last, but I think most of it has taken place over the past week. And the majority of it has been yarn for this sweater. So I started dyeing yarn for it on Wednesday night and then cast on yesterday. So yeah, it's been, you know, I was really sort of like rushing to get it dyed and get it dry. And actually some of the skeins aren't quite dry yet because I just finished up the last bit of it, I think Friday night. So these two skeins were dyed on Friday, one Friday morning and one Friday night. And like I said, it's Sunday right now. So like they're pretty much 100% dry, but I just haven't quite wound them up yet because I know at some point I'm going to have to wind them into balls soon anyway, which is why they're still loose like this. But this is the other two, right? So I dyed up these two and then this one. So I have 3 of my main color because according to the pattern, that's what I should need. And you know, if I have to dye up a 4th one, that's fine. I have written down like sort of the recipe that I used to get this color, so I should have no problem getting it again. And then I dyed up the 1 skein of this guy. So yeah, I know, you know, that when you are doing sweaters and you're using like hand-dyed yarn or whatever, you're supposed to alternate skeins and all of that. I'm not gonna do that. I'm just going to play a little bit fast and loose with changing skeins, partly because this yarn is so tonal to start with. I don't know how well it will pick up on camera, but you know, as it's been knitting up, you can see that it's very tonal. And so what I'm hoping is that I will just switch colors after I get to one of the stripes with the contrasting color, right? Like I'll just use that as sort of the point where I switch skeins when I have to. And my hope is that because it will be, you know, sort of visually separated by that little thin stripe of the contrasting color, and because the yarn is so tonal anyway, and because it's relatively close, right? Like it's hard to see the difference between those 2 skeins there. My hope is that it will just be fine, and I'm just not going to worry too much about it, and we're going to go with it. But yeah, so that has been a lot of dyeing that has taken place recently. And then the other thing that I've dyed, I shared a picture of this on Instagram, so you may have already seen this, but I wanted to do sort of a dip gradient, and this was inspired by a picture that I saw on the thread on Ravelry for my how to dye yarn tutorial, and I forget who it was that posted this picture, but they had done sort of this like dip gradient, and I thought it was so pretty, and I wanted to try something like that. So what I did was I took, regular skein of this sock yarn, so this same sort of base. So I took a skein of this and I rewound it to be longer because I wanted my skein to be longer than this. And so I sort of did this like weird figure 8 pattern to lengthen out the skein. And then I took it and I had my pot of water. And originally I put in 10 drops of yellow food coloring and I dipped in, about that much of the end. And I left it there for, I think, a minute and a half or so. And then as soon as that minute and a half was up, I added in, about that much more yarn into the pot. And I added in 9 drops of yellow food coloring and 1 drop of red. And then I waited. And then once the time was up, I added in 8 drops of yellow, 2 drops of red, and, dunked more in. So, no. Wait, I'm sorry. I have that backwards. I put it all in to start with, and then I took about that much out each time. So that eventually, when it was mostly red, there was only about that much left in. And then I sort of went back down because there was still a decent amount of dye left in the water. So I sort of, in 1 minute increments, added about that much back into the pot until it was pretty full, and then I just left it there to cook. I would maybe do a tutorial on this someday. Speaking of tutorials, I know people have been asking for like the oven dyeing one and the how to do like speckles and stuff. And I do want to record tutorials on those. And I'm thinking I might try and get those done mid-May, after classes are done and everything, but before summer classes start is sort of my goal. So mid-May, hopefully. So I'll let you guys know when that's coming up. But anyway, so this basically produced sort of this like gradient along the skein. And I took a picture of it before I reskeined it. So I will put that in here so you guys can see sort of what that looked like. But because of the way that I had skeined it up to make it longer like that, it was sort of a disaster. So I reskeined it. So now it looks like this. And this, kind of, I guess, gives a better idea of what it will look like knit up, right? So it's... and I'm sure it will probably pool when it's knitted up because the repeats are fairly long. But yeah, it's just these really beautiful like reds and oranges and yellows, and there's a little bit of like almost, sort of the natural yarn that, didn't quite take the dye right at first, like sort of the first batch that got pulled out. And so I just think it's so pretty and I'm just so pleased with it. Would I dye yarn like this again? Probably not. Except maybe to like, do the tutorial or something that I mentioned. But like this was sort of a pain in the butt to dye just because at least the way I was doing it, it required me to basically stand at the stove taking care of it for, a half hour or 45 minutes or however long it took to take all of it out and then put all of it back in. So it's just a little bit more labor intensive than I would prefer, but I really love the results and I really just think it created, such a pretty yarn that just has so much sort of depth of color to it. And like there's even some bits, and I don't know how well it will show up on camera, but there's some bits sort of in the middle that instead of being orange are almost more like peachy, and maybe you'll be able to see that better in the picture that I put in before. But yeah, like there's some very like peachy tones in it, and I just can't even with it, guys. Like I love it. I think it turned out really, really well, and I'm super pleased with it. So yeah, that's the other thing that I've been dyeing lately. But I have a few more minutes before I have to pause and save. So let's talk about the knit along. The current knit along that's running is the Garter or Something Yellow, which is running through the end of April. So when this episode goes up, you guys still have more than 2 weeks to get things in, which is plenty of time to get in, well, a pair of socks if you're speedy, or, if you've been working on something, you still have plenty of time to finish or to do a hat or something like that. So yeah, we've got a lot of finished objects in there, and I've really been enjoying seeing them. Again, because there's just such a bigger range this year, lots of hats and socks and stuff. And so, yeah, it's been really fun. And in terms of the prize, last time I talked to you guys, I promised you that I would have a prize to show you by the time I recorded next, and I actually just showed it to you. So this yarn I dyed up specifically to be the prize for this knit along, which is why I did something that was maybe a little bit more labor intensive than I would just do for myself. But yeah, this is going to be the prize, and I'm sure there will be more to it because I had totally forgotten that I actually have a fiber festival coming up at the end of the month that I'll be going to, and I'll talk more about that in chit chat. But yeah, the Powhatan Festival of Fiber is coming up at the end of April, so I'm sure that I will be picking up other goodies to go along with this while I'm there, but I won't know until I go. So this at least is the yarny bit of the prize, and then I'm sure there will be more to come for that. So yeah, and then by the time I record next, we will be almost into our next knit along. I'm trying to think of when I record next will be, oh no, that'll be the 23rd. So I'll talk more about what's coming up then. But yeah, so that's the knit along stuff. And then the only thing I have left that's knitting related is my question of the week. So my question of the week this week is very knitting related, and it's actually sort of a technical question. But my question is, how do you carry yarn like up the side of your work for stripes? Hopefully that made sense, right? So, and this is coming from a very selfish place because with, this cardigan that I'm doing, right? So I have, this contrasting yarn that I'm doing for my stripes, and then it's like, well, the pattern calls for 10 rows between the stripes. I think I'm going to do 8 rows. But I don't want to have to keep cutting my contrasting yarn every single time because that's going to be a lot of ends to weave in. So I'm kind of carrying it up the side. But whenever I've done this before, it's the same thing when I did my crazy Zauberball striped socks or whatever. The way that I carried my yarn was just sort of like haphazardly, catching it with my other yarn. So how do you carry yarn up the side for stripes? Because I would love to have a little bit more consistent method. So if you can describe it in words, great. If there's maybe like a video tutorial that you used or like a blog tutorial that you used to learn it, link it, because I would love to have a better method that is a little bit less all over the place than what I currently do, which is just try to catch the yarn sometimes and just pull it up the side with it. So yeah, what is your method for carrying the unused color up the side for stripes? So that's going to be it for the knitting sort of stuff. And if that's all you were here for, thanks very much for hanging out with me this week. I appreciate it. And if you are here to do the chit chat stuff, I'm going to pause and then I'll be right back and we'll do some chit chat. Okay, chit chat time. And I'm going to attempt to knit a few rows on this guy because the rows are just so long right now, and especially so because I cast on extra armpit stitches. Any chance I have to get a little bit done, I'll take. But yeah, so the past 2 weeks of my life. So last weekend we went to Busch Gardens Williamsburg for the first time, which I posted a vlog of, so I won't harp on that too much, but it was a lot of fun. Really, really enjoyed it. Definitely excited to go back there at some point soon. I actually don't know if we're going to do any theme park visits this weekend. Like I said, it's Sunday and it's actually mid-afternoon on Sunday. So it's looking like probably not, just because it's getting towards the end of the semester and Wesley is trying to get his thesis finished up so he can graduate in May. So, it's really crunch time for him. And so, he just wasn't feeling up to doing it today. And so we're not going to do it today. But we might go up like some night during the week this next week because they're open during the week this week because it's spring break for like all the area schools. So who knows? But so far we haven't been, to either of the theme parks this weekend, and we're not going to go today, I don't think, even though it's great weather for it today. So I might go out for a little bit of a walk later because it's really nice out today. But yeah, and I just got like a tickle in my throat. Ugh. Okay. Otherwise, like I every day just seems to take infinitely long and also disappear way too quickly. And I think a lot of that is just because, again, we're getting towards the end of the semester. I can just feel everyone is, just a little bit frazzled and a little bit, running on fumes. And I feel that way too. The class that I'm taking has definitely, it's work. It's things that need to get done. But on that note about the class that I'm taking, we had our second test. Oh my gosh, when was it? Not this past week, but the week before this past week, maybe? And I got 100 on it, so I'm pretty pleased with that. I mean, I really should have because it was just math, and there's no reason I shouldn't have done really well on it, but even still, it's nice to, sort of have that little boost of confidence. But yeah, otherwise, stuff that's been going on at work. I mentioned that I'm on the hiring committee for this new faculty member that we are trying to get hired, and we have now started the in-person interviews, like the on-campus interviews. So we have 4 people that we're interviewing. The first one we actually interviewed this past Friday, so 1 down. We have another 2 this next week, and then 1 the week after. And then I'm not exactly sure what the timeline is like after that, like when we'll make some decisions and all of that. But yeah, that was definitely interesting because, I don't have a ton of experience like working in academia, and, my interview now was long enough ago that I don't exactly remember it. I just remember it being a really long day. And so yeah, it was interesting like trying to interview someone because I don't really, especially because it's a teaching position. It's like, I don't really care about their research. I don't really care about any of that. It's more so to me, like, what are you like as a person? And are you, a nice person to talk to, are like stuff like that. How do you present yourself as a person? And then of course they also do have to do a like teaching demonstration to the department. So a lot of it was sort of based off of that. Which, I mean, everyone is like, yeah, that's kind of what you're doing, right? Like their credentials are their credentials. And you already know that because that's all on paper. Like this is, the point of this is like the intangibles that you can only tell from being in person. But, even still, I just feel very like, I don't know what I'm doing. But yeah, so the one on Friday, I really liked the person, like as a person, like they were fine. But obviously like that's only the first one. So, who knows? Like maybe once the other people show up, I will either think that this first person was like meh, or I'll think they're even more impressive. But, of course I need other people to compare them to. But yeah, unfortunately that chewed up like my entire day Friday, and it's going to take up a lot of time this next week too. The 2 that we have coming in this next week. So that's always fun. Like I was filling out my calendar for this next week, and some of the days, I just have like nothing going on, and then some of the days it like completely filled up the space that I have available to write down stuff. So yeah, it's gonna be a good week. But the other nice thing is that we are almost done with like the labs for the semester. Like with the upper level lab that I teach, we have this week and then 1 more week, and then we're done. So that's nice. And then with the other labs, we have 2 more weeks. So in 2 weeks, I will basically be done with all of my teaching responsibilities, which is super nice. Because, it will give me time to sort of study a little bit for the final in the class that I'm taking. And it will just give me a little bit of time to like catch my breath, at the end of the semester. And I'm a little bit lucky in that I get to do that before everyone else does. But, I also set it up that way. So there's that. But yeah, that's been work. Work just is busy. And what else? I mentioned the Powhatan Festival of Fiber is coming up. I forget what day it is, but I think it's like the last Saturday of April. And if you've been around since last year, you'll remember that I went to that last year. And I'll try and maybe link to my episode that I did around that time last year, below. Because I think I did sort of a vlog style episode for that. And of course, I'll vlog it again this year. Hopefully a little bit better than I did last year. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to that. I'm going to drag Wesley with me again this year. And I'm a little bit sad because I know that like Maryland Sheep and Wool, I think, is the next weekend. But that's way up in Maryland, and it's not easily accessible like by public transit. Like you pretty much have to have a car to get up there. And given that that is like right smack in the middle of finals here, and like Wesley will be, defending right around that time, I don't think I want to, do that, because I don't really want to go up there by myself. Like if I could take public transit, if I could just hop on the train and get up there, I totally would go by myself. But not driving, and I wouldn't feel comfortable taking his car so far away. So yeah, bummer that I'm gonna miss that one, but I do want to try and make it to more like knitting gatherings this year. It's just really limited by kind of getting to them is really the problem. But yeah, I am looking forward to the Powhatan Festival of Fiber because it was a lot of fun last year, and I think it'll be a lot of fun this year. But otherwise, most of the news that I have to share is regarding food, because as you guys know, I am all about food. And as you know, I am totally fascinated with this whole process of making yogurt, since I update you guys on it so often. But I did have a yogurt success this past week. I can feel myself getting much more confident just in general making yogurt. And it's no longer this like big event. It's just kind of like, oh, I'm out of yogurt, I'll make some more. So that's been really nice. But this past week was the first time that I used my own yogurt as starter for the next batch. And I'd always heard that like, you can do this, but after a couple of batches of doing it, it doesn't work very well. So we'll see. Obviously, I've only done it once, and then I put some from that batch, away for the next one. So we'll see how that goes. But I did find somewhere that said that you should put your yogurt in the freezer. Like you should put your starter in the freezer, and then you just take it out like while you're heating up your milk and use that. And I don't know if maybe that helps to make it work better when you are trying to like make it last longer. Like I'm not exactly sure what about using your own starter makes it stop working after a couple of batches. But my guess is that maybe the bacteria run out of food and then they die and then it doesn't work anymore. In which case maybe putting it in the freezer would be better because, then they're basically going to be dormant while you're waiting. I don't know. We'll see. But I'm going to try it again this next week, obviously, and see how that goes. And, I'll report back. But I've really been enjoying making yogurt. The only annoyance is that I haven't been like straining it to make like Greek yogurt, but I do want to, especially because I typically add like pureed fruit, which introduces more moisture back into it. So I'd like to drain out a little bit of the moisture to start with, because otherwise it just becomes really runny. And so, but the problem is like straining yogurt, you either need like a yogurt strainer or I know people do it with cheesecloth, but like every time I see cheesecloth, like I look at it at the store and I'm like, that is way too big of holes and I don't see how it's going to work very well. So you can buy a yogurt strainer, or I know coffee filters work well because that's what I used the first time. But the problem is that I don't have coffee filters. Like I kind of have to like overlap them in my colander, like align the colander with coffee filters. But that requires like overlapping a couple of them and it just makes kind of a mess then. And so of course the solution would be that if I could just get my hands on those like big giant industrial coffee filters that they use at like coffee places for like the big huge like 1 gallon coffee brewers, that would work super well. But the problem is that to order those, like I found them on Amazon and it's going to cost me about as much in shipping as the coffee filters themselves. And so at that point, I might as well just buy like one of the, like dedicated coffee strainer things because that's the same cost. So that's been kind of annoying. And so I've just been putting off dealing with it because I just don't really know what the solution is, because no matter what the solution is, just throw money at the problem. And I just don't want to do that. So there's that. I even went to like a local coffee place near campus to see if I could buy some of their jumbo filters off of them. So that way, I wouldn't have to pay for shipping. And I went up and I was like, hey, is there any way I could buy some of those giant coffee filters? And the girl kind of was like looked at like their little like retail section where like they sell like their coffee beans that they roast in house and stuff, and like didn't see anything there. And she's like, no, I don't think so. And it's like, but I can see them. Why can't you sell them to me? Just anyway. I understand why, but it's just very annoying. But yeah, otherwise I've been having great success with my yogurt. And then I had great success today with making a dressing. So I've made salad dressings before, and I always feel very meh about them because, for one thing, I don't really like vinaigrettes that much, and that's typically what most salad dressings sort of are, is a vinaigrette. Like most ones that are easy to make yourself tend to be vinaigrettes, and I'm not crazy about vinaigrettes. I've made like a sort of quick and dirty ranch before, which worked pretty well, well enough to soothe the craving that I had for ranch, but not good enough that I would never buy ranch again. But Wesley eats the same salad pretty much every day for lunch. Like, we're totally creatures of habit. We eat the same lunches pretty much every day. And he eats the same salad week after week after week, which is made with like coleslaw mix, but like just the cabbage part, like not like coleslaw actually, but the like the bagged shredded cabbage that they sell as coleslaw mix. So he takes that and he mixes it with chopped up like rotisserie chicken. Like, we just buy a pre-cooked chicken, take all the meat off of it, chop it up, throw it in there. And then cashews, and he mixes in those like lo mein noodles as well, like right before he eats it. And then he had been buying this dressing that was a Newman's Own dressing, and I think it was like the sesame ginger flavor. But the problem with that is, like, pretty much any commercially available dressing is going to have things in it that, like, depending on how health conscious you are, you're going to be more or less comfortable with eating them. And he is not super health conscious, so he's kind of like, whatever. But I don't like some of the ingredients in it, just, you know, the fact that it is shelf stable and like all of that. And like, you know, the fact that they use like soybean oil and stuff in it, I just wasn't super comfortable with. So I finally was just like, okay, I'm going to make him a sesame ginger dressing and see if he likes it. So I will post a link to the recipe that I used down below, but it worked really well. And like, the most expensive, or I guess the most hard to find thing in it is the miso, which I found at my local Kroger. It was just in with like the Asian foods. And I certainly don't know that this dressing is any cheaper to make than like the stuff that he was buying, but it certainly makes me feel better that it's at least a little bit less unhealthy than what he was eating before, and he likes it better. I had never tasted the original one that he was using because the one that he buys in the bottle is not gluten-free, so I can't eat it. But this one is gluten-free because, of course, you have control over all the ingredients, and the only thing in it that would have gluten in it is the soy sauce, and we use gluten-free soy sauce. So I was actually able to try this one, and I actually liked it quite a bit. Like, I would eat it too. So highly recommend. If you're looking for sort of like an Asian-y dressing for things, I highly recommend. But yeah, and I currently also have pork shoulder in the oven right now. It's just been a very food prep sort of day for me. But I have pork shoulder in the oven right now that hopefully is going to be delicious for dinner. But yeah, otherwise it's Wesley went off to campus. He's, I think, doing some grading up there, and I'm just going to sort of hang around, and I really should clean. Like, that is really what I should be doing, because while everything looks somewhat clean for you guys in the background here, our apartment is a disaster. But I really don't want to clean. I really just want to sit and work on my cardigan some more. So I might do that until my hands get too tired and I don't want to do it anymore, and then I will maybe clean. But yeah, or maybe I'll go for a walk. I really should go for a walk and get outside and get some fresh air. But anyway, that's, I think, going to be it for me today. I did not even get 2 rows of my sweater done, so there's that. But yeah, that's going to be it for me today. I'm hoping that this episode wasn't too disjointed. I know that because I'm not recording every week, it's a little bit tougher to like get back into the groove each time I sit down and record, but hopefully by, you know, mid-May, things will go back to like weekly podcasting again, because the semester ends just about at the beginning of May, and then, you know, I might take a little bit of time to just like catch my breath and, you know, record those couple of tutorials, and then hopefully I should be back to every week podcasting, which is what I would prefer, especially because at that point, you know, obviously work will slow down a decent amount, and hopefully then my knitting output will increase. So, you know, knitting output increases, podcasting output increases. That you know, that was why I cut it down in the first place, was because my knitting output had decreased, and so the podcasting should decrease. But yeah. Anyway, that's for the future. Although it's not that far away now. It's like a month away. But that's going to be it for this week, at least. Thank you very much for hanging out with me, and I will see you guys in 2 weeks. Bye.